And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dami Roelse, world traveler and spiritual student who, after she lost her husband, she hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, spanning 2,650 miles. During her journeys, she's had interdimensional experiences, which we will learn about, and more. Dami, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Well, I'm very excited to be here today and share what I learned on my journey.
Dami, let's start from the beginning. And how did you become interested in hiking in the first place?
The way beginning was when I was 23, 24. I was in India and I had, at the time, I came from Holland, but I had an American boyfriend. And he was a hiker and climber in the Sierras because he came from California. So when we were in Kathmandu, in Nepal, he says, let's go to Everest. And I go, oh, I had no clue what that was because living in Holland, flatland, I had never climbed a mountain in my life. So he outfitted me a little bit with things that we could find in Kathmandu, and we set up on a 3-week hiking trip to base camp Mount Everest. No porters, no long lines, found food along the way in tea shops. It was, deep inside me, it set something up like, whoa, I'm standing here surrounded by all the highest peaks in the world. I was at 18,300 feet on top of Kalapatar, which is called the Black Rock. It sits in the Khumbu Glacier, and it's the same elevation as base camp. So no special equipment. So we did that and came back, and I just sort of filed it as one of my adventures of that year and never thought about, doing more of that. When I eventually moved to the West Coast in America, later in 73, took a little while too, living in the country, hiking and walking was difficult when you live in the country, but I learned more about backpacking. So throughout my life, I started doing some backpacking, short distances, but it didn't really, with my second husband, the boyfriend became a husband, but that didn't last. We were mostly doing it in Oregon. As the kids were older, when you have little kids, it's kind of hard to go backpacking. So backpacking was in my life, but never more than like a weekend or a few days or something. Now, when my husband was quite sick and declining, I had some decisions to make on how to support him, how to be of help. His personality was changing. Things were quite difficult. So I had heard from a friend about a trek that she did in the Himalayas. And she connected me up with that guide. And I went in 2005 to hike in Ladakh in a roadless area for 12 days to a monastery. And that's where I learned sort of the depth of what hiking at altitude can do for you in terms of, mental outlook, in terms of, it's not just a physical accomplishment, but it's how you relate to the world around you. Because you have so little oxygen at that level that, you have to really, everything slows down, your brain slows down, you perceive things differently. So I repeated that, not the same trip, but I went back later because it was very fascinating to be hiking in a country that's Buddhist and spiritual, very spiritually oriented, and how people approach the trail. And I learned from that a lot. Never thought about doing a long hike in America until later I heard, I found out that there was the Pacific Crest Trail that was in my backyard in Oregon. I was living in Ashland, Oregon. And I had, set foot on it, but never thought much of it until I thought my husband had passed away. I was looking at who am I, what am I doing? And I said, I have been in so many places in the world. I don't even know my own backyard, and the best way to get to know it is on foot. So that summer I decided to go hike Oregon. And that's how it started.
Well, during one of your hikes in India, you had an out-of-body experience. Can you tell us about that?
While I was in India, I did encounter or found a teacher or guru, as some people say. And when I was there, he did what we call an initiation and gave me the name that I carry now. It's Dami for Damayanti. That was an incredibly, I couldn't explain it. I was not on drugs. And I was in another, totally other realm for hours. And my boyfriend who was there, he said, you didn't move. You just sat there, and I was like floating in a totally different world. Later, I understand, because I'm a long-term practitioner of meditation, I understand more that there are definitely other realms. And when you, in this case, was with the help of an accomplished teacher, but you can also reach some of that in meditation. If you're in deep samadhi, he just put me in samadhi, But if you're in a deep, concentrated state, you can actually travel into those places. You will see them. And you may get messages, or you may hear things that you normally can't perceive. So that was always, when I was young, it had an incredible impact on me because it opened my heart in a way. I was very resistant to all the guru stuff in India. But after that, I was totally in love with this guy, 80-year-old man in a blanket. I just felt so much love that was just pouring out of him and between us. And I realized that, there is a realm where everything is, where love is energy. Energy is love. And I was able to perceive that. And that is, I know now that is a very special gift to get when you're in a human body. And so it brings a lot of responsibility with it. And I have to really, develop love and compassion for other beings in this world. That's my work now. So
I'm assuming you were meditating when this happened. And you said that you were in the state of samadhi. What is that?
Samadhi is a Hindu word for deep, deep concentration, where you're not distracted by external things that are happening in your body or around you. You may hear them, you may notice them, but it's totally effortless. You get into a state where you're just totally focused in on this other realm, or I would say the bigger realm, because it's not other, it's there all the time, but we usually can't experience it.
Did you lift out of your body while you were sitting there and see it turn back?
No, that didn't happen. Some people have levitation dreams, or some people can do it when they meditate. I've never developed those kind of cities, they call them in India, special powers. Now, the guru or the man I was with, he could do stuff like that. He could change his body. He's come to me in a body in different places in the world. And I wasn't making it up. I was not looking for it. So he would just show up. And so he had, special powers that way.
Would he visit you in your dreams?
Yes, but also when I was, just involved in something in everyday reality. All of a sudden, there he would be. And I remember in the first time when he actually passed out of his body, I was in a yoga retreat in California, and someone was speaking in the front about what we were doing there. And this person totally just changed all of a sudden, and he looked like my guru. And I went, whoa. And I looked around me, does anybody else seeing this? And nobody was seeing that. I saw it. And so the only way I can explain it, that I have a special connection with this being, an energy connection. So he can manifest for me while other people are not aware of it. And then 2 days later, when I was back out in the world, I got the news that that was the day he passed out of his body. And he just sort of, he left this earth, his earthly body, and floated around and visited people.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the realms that you saw when you were having this experience?
There were different aspects of it, and I've heard this from other people later. So I saw cities that were like rising and falling, and beings that were not like regular beings as we know them here on this planet. They were they were taller, and they had sort of flowing garments, and I wouldn't say they were angels, but they seemed to sort of float in and out and through these cities, and there was music. Some people call it celestial music, but it wasn't like violins, but it had sort of that tone, or that quality of violins that was there, and it was just happening. And everything seemed to move sort of in a wave-like motion. I mean, like I said, the rising and falling, cities would come and then disappear. People would come and disappear. And it just, it was fascinating.
How did that experience change you?
I came out of it just full of love. I had never experienced that in my heart, in my being, just feeling it. And I directed it to the guru, but I could feel it with other people too. Now, that strong feeling didn't last, and so I wanted to just be around him so I could feel it. It was definitely ecstatic kind of love. And he said to me, I said, I just want to stay here, and this was only a year before he was going to leave his body, so he knew that already. He said, no, you just go west and you go do your work. I said, yeah, but my visa is expiring. Can you extend it so I can stay longer? He said, nope, Joe, go to the west, go do your work. So I did a lot of crying because it was like losing a loved one, And so that's, in those days, he would come in my dreams and then I would wake up happy again. But as over the years, that intensity lessens. But I did experience, so as my practice got stronger, my meditation practice over the years got stronger, I did experience some states that were similar in terms of energy rising and falling, and just this effortless, loving state. And I could experience it. My husband was also a meditator. If we focused on it, we could really experience it between the two of us. So for me, really, I was hoping to touch on that in my relationship with my partner. And since I don't have my partner anymore, I've had to transmute it. I experienced it maybe not exactly to the same intensity, but I experienced it in nature. Nature's been the replacement there, and so that's what drew me back over and over into the wilderness and these incredible vistas and incredible places where I felt so held and so cared for, that, love is everywhere. People say that, but I started experiencing that when I was doing this. It took me 10 years. I didn't do it all in one shot. I'm older. I started when I was 65, and so I would go every year for 2 weeks to 5 weeks or something, and just lived on the trail, and sort of found home there, a home of love and caring. And that's why I say body and grace is the title. Yes, you have to have a body that can do that. But I experienced with grace, people in religion talk about that. But grace was a force, a benevolent force that was around me all the time. I feel like, it's just given to me. It's not like because I'm so special or such a good person, but I was enveloped in that. So, that's how it changed me, I would say.
Prior to the experience, did you practice any particular religion, or were you an atheist?
Well, I was a seeker. I would say that I talk about that in my book, Fly Free. I was raised in a Protestant environment, but my father was an atheist. He had promised my mother that he would help raise the kids in the church, and he says, and as they get older, they can make up their own mind. So they had an understanding. But I think it's very powerful to get that from your parents who you love, that they say, it's up to you, This is not just, I believe this or I believe this, and you have to figure it out. So I really became, I was actually quite confused as an older teenager about all that, because I realized, what the church was saying. I was in a youth church, and what do you mean, God? What is that? So then as a young student, I started taking philosophy classes, and I went that route. That wasn't very satisfying. And it's really what drove me to go to India. And, I didn't tell people that. I had some other, fancy reason for it. But I wanted to see if I could figure out what life was about. I'd heard of, teachers and that live and are in India. So I wanted to explore that. And so I went there for a year, traveling around all over.
After the experience, would you consider yourself a Buddhist who eventually turned to the religion of nature?
Well, I would say I'm a Buddhist practitioner, because I did pick up a Buddhist meditation practice when I was in India, and I've practiced that ever since. So I wouldn't say I'm a Buddhist, because Buddhist is also a religion in a way. It's a movement, and I especially experienced that when I went to Tibet in 2019. It felt like the Catholic Church in a different form all over again. And I couldn't really, I can appreciate that people need that to survive in these harsh environments, but a lot of superstition, a lot of buying, off so you can have a good next life. I mean, it's just like Catholicism. So no, I am a Buddhist practitioner, and I experience the heart opening when I'm in nature. So yeah, they coexist. Buddhism the practice isn't particularly aimed at love or experience of love. It is aimed at, one part of the practice is to practice loving kindness for all beings. And that comes out of the knowledge that people in their practice experience that oneness with the universe, that we're all just part of this. You can't just say, well, I'm here and the war in Iran is happening over there. No, it's all happening at the same time, and we're all affected by it, which also means that whatever I put out, whatever I share with the world, is also spreads around. It does have an effect. It may seem minuscule, but it does have an effect if enough people do it. So there is that force of goodness that we can put into the world.
As you became more experienced in hiking, did you prefer to do it solo?
I would say yes, in a way. There's two sides to it. Solo really helped me feel at one with my environment, because there's no disruption from another person who wants to talk or has problems to deal with. You're only yourself with the environment. But the camaraderie, the deep knowing of one another that I've experienced with hiking with buddies, as I call them, hiking buddies, and they've come to me off and on, because this is not something that everyone that wants to can do. So it also feels like these people, when I encountered them, or they were sent to me, or they contacted me and say, can I go for a stretch with you? Those were also really wonderful experiences of being human together and trusting and relying on one another, because there's a lot of hardship in long distance hiking. And it really helps to have a caring person with you. I don't like big groups, it's just too distracting. But two or most, maybe three is sort of what works.
Did you find yourself meeting complete strangers on the trail and surrendering to them and being able to completely trust them?
Well, so one of my best hiking buddies from Holland right now, I met on Facebook. I wasn't looking for anybody to hike with, but she was asking for a ride to the trail. She was coming from the Netherlands to hike for 3 months on the Pacific Crest Trail to the Sierras. There was so much snow in the Sierras that she had to start farther north and kind of give up on the Sierras. So I offered her a ride. And then I spoke with her a little bit more because I wanted to check her out when I was in Holland. I said, okay, I'll meet up with you. Since I'm Dutch, we understand each other. So I met her in Etna one day. She had gotten there by bus, and I said, I'll hike with you for a week. That turned into 2 weeks. And that has turned into years of, we've gone to the Himalayas, Tibet together. We've gone to Morocco. We've done Cornwall pilgrimage. We do something every year. And it started really tough because she wasn't really, she was a walker, because I knew that already. She had walked the Camino and walked back from the Camino to Holland, miles and miles. But the wilderness circumstances that you have on the West Coast was new to her. And so I told her to get food and what to do, and gave her some advice ahead of time, and get some snow spikes, or yak tracks, as some people call them. And because we didn't know, but it was June, but there's still areas when you're higher up that were still under snow. And that first day was baptism through fire, they say. I knew what she was made of, because her yak track broke. She slipped and rolled 70 feet down in the snow until I yelled at her, just go into a tree well, or I wouldn't have been able to retrieve her. And had to haul her out of there, and then she couldn't use the yak tracks, so she had to step in my footsteps. It took us a whole day to do the 5 miles that we had planned to do. And she was just terrified. It was really gave her some PTSD of being in the snow, and yet she kept going. Every day I checked with her. Luckily, the next day we didn't have any snow, but we encountered some more snowfields on that trip. And slowly it got better for her. And we just sort of really bonded over, you know, on the trail, you learn what people are made of. And you don't have to talk much at that point, you know.
I'm assuming that you carry your tent, you carry tools, you carry food, water, everything, right?
Right. You try not to carry too much water. Water is very heavy, and so you get it along the way. You have to filter it, so you have a whole filtration system. But you pick up water along the way. But if you're in the desert, you carry sometimes 3 to 4 liters. There's no water. That weighs 8 pounds or 8.5 pounds by itself.
How long can you go before you have to re-equip?
The first time I went out, and I had 10 days worth of food and what I needed. That turned out to be a little more than, I didn't know when I first started in Oregon. I had done short training sessions, but not long. And so you learn that I had too much food. It took me years not to take too much food. I was always prepared in case somebody ran out. And
I guess that's the mother in you.
I guess so. Or just the control freak who, doesn't trust. And I really worked with that element because I learned more as the years went by. I learned to trust that I would be okay. I would inch into that. How long can I go without water? We ran out of water once. And we had just a little bit. I had 2 cups of water from the evening till the next day. We had to hike 5 miles. So I could drink very little that night, and then you hiked. So I got to feel that your mind kind of goes funny when you're dehydrated and you're moving. So I started to feel that. When they say you get delirious, I wasn't delirious, but I was definitely experiencing things differently. So I wouldn't seek it out, but I did find out that I could go with a lot less food. When this friend, she had not bought enough dinner food. She didn't realize she couldn't buy things along the way. Well, yeah, sorry, it's not Europe. So we had to just share breakfast and my breakfast that I had. So I was basically eating half of what I normally ate. And I was fine, and we were fine. And so I learned that you can do with a lot less. And that's still a theme in my life. I can go much longer and a lot less than I was taught to, or than my mind says what I need. Those are incredible life lessons to get when you're on the trail. I can recommend it.
While on the trail, didn't you come across Bigfoot tracks at some point?
I did. Well, I call them Bigfoot tracks. They were so large, and it was definitely, it had toes and the shape of a foot. And I saw a lot of bear tracks, unless it was a bear that had slid for a long time, for a ways. Bears don't tend to slide like that. So I said, well, these stories about Bigfoots, maybe there's one here. And it was definitely, we're far away from civilization, so it's quite possible that beings walk around there. And they were, two steps like that had dried up a little bit in a muddy area.
You prefer to use the word interdimensional over paranormal. Why is that?
Well, because paranormal says something above or beyond the normal. And I see it as another form of what we're experiencing. So normal is a very limiting concept. And then to say, so what we are experiencing is normal and everything else is other. And I'm saying what we're experiencing is a very limited experience of what is there. So I feel it's a much more inclusive statement, way of describing what the universe is.
You caution against sensationalizing paranormal or interdimensional abilities. Why is that?
Well, I'm a Buddhist practitioner, and my goal in life is not to be able to have these sort of alternate experiences. That's not the goal. The goal is to come to a place of understanding and experiencing the oneness of everything. You know, what we might call enlightenment, a state of ecstatic peace, calm, centeredness that isn't affected by the changes that are happening constantly. So that's hard work. And I see that, you know, for a while I did some psychic training because I could know things and see things that you would say are paranormal. You know, colors around people. Sometimes I would know that this person is going to die. I wasn't real comfortable with that. And so I worked with someone in that realm, learned about grounding and really, you know, being connected with the earth before you open your abilities or your mind to it. And so I practiced it for a while until I became pregnant. And she said, you know, it's not a good thing to do when you have a child inside you, because the energies are a much higher frequency. And as we know from some people who are channeling other beings, you know, it's hard on their bodies. And I just wasn't interested in doing that. Maybe it's not the kind of service I need to do in this lifetime. I just went totally back to just practicing towards insight and understanding and loving kindness.
During your solo trips, would you end up meditating every night once you stopped for the evening?
No, not in those years. I do it now, but what I discovered, having gone to many 10-day retreats, that the experiences that you have when you cut yourself off from all the external stimulation that happened in a retreat, you do that so that you can actually deepen inside and become more sensitive to the stillness that surrounds us and that we are a part of, that peaceful place. But to get there, usually in the first 3 days, you have lots of physical pain and discomfort, and you can't sit still, and then it starts shifting. You go into another place, and then often in that other place, you then tap into things that are blocking inside you that come to the surface. You learn to just sit with it and be with it and watch it change, because the underlying teaching is everything changes. So if it's there, let's see how long it lasts, you know? And at some point, it just isn't there. It doesn't have a grip on you anymore. I had that same experience when I was hiking, because the routine every day is so much like a retreat. You get up, you make your coffee or whatever you drink in the morning, you pack up your camp and you start walking, and you walk all day, and you do the reverse in the evening when you're tired. Yes, you're not sitting with your eyes closed, but there's that focus on breath. If you climb, you know, if you're going up to 2,000 elevation with a 30-pound pack, you have to focus on your breath. So there's a lot of focus on breath. It's like walking meditation. I discovered it had the same effect on me over time that retreats would do. So why go sit, you know, I may sit and be at peace in the evening, but no need to really take my mind away from all the externals.
Have you ever found yourself being bilocated while walking on the trail alone? And what I mean by that is you're walking and you're through the woods, but you're kind of astral projecting somewhere else simultaneously.
No.
Maybe some people would call that a daydream, but a little different.
No, I haven't experienced that. I have experienced it in a sort of, I wouldn't say I was dreaming, I was resting, and I thought I had a dream, but really I went to a whole other world and it was around a time when I had I was still recovering from a hand surgery. I have a deep scar in my hand that it had an infection in there that they couldn't treat, so they had to cut it open and scrape it all out. And in that, what you would say bilocating, I went to another life or another place where this hand had been burned. Somebody, was branded as, it's not okay. And my hand had been burned. And I think that some of those experiences that we have had in other realms, I think they're happening simultaneously, but they can carry over into what I experience as my current life. And so, it brought to me that I have a task or, something I do in this life. I was professionally, I was a counselor. I help people figure things out in their life. Some of the things that I help people, older women to find, a new direction in their life. I coach, and I connect them with nature and the power of that. And that's why I wrote this book, that it can happen out there in nature. It's not like voodoo, But I don't say that I had a direct out of body or alternate body experience at the same time as when I was hiking. The hiking really keeps you very much in your body. But I did have voices come to me. I do have that at times when I hike. When I was standing on Forester Pass and I was doing that stretch solo, the voice just came. Because when we were in Nepal, in the 70s, we couldn't get into Tibet. We had thought about doing that. I was like fascinated. I was always fascinated with the Tibetans that I met in the refugee camps and stuff. They were so different than the Indians. They had such a authenticity and a sense of inner confidence, men and women. It's not a patriarchal society. Women have a real place. So I was always really interested in who they were and how they behaved. So yeah, I had the desire to go to Tibet, and I felt an affinity. So I was standing on Forester Pass, and it said, I just climbed up to 14,000 feet, and the voice said, if you want to go to Tibet, you need to go now. Where did that come from? I hadn't thought about going to Tibet in a long time. It was not on my mind. And so the next year I was in Tibet. And I realized that what I did there, yes, I went to the Chinese side, base camp, Everest. I visited on that trip places that I'd been 50 years ago, and I saw all the changes that have happened, which was very heartbreaking, especially Kathmandu. Oh my God. And all the glaciers that are gone, and climate change has done. But we went to Mount Kailas, which is the holy mountain in the western part of Tibet, and circumambulated it. You can't climb it. It's never been climbed. And so the three religions, the Hindu, the Tibetan Buddhist, and the Bon religion, which is an ancient religion in that region, they all consider it the source of spiritual power. And as I circumambulated, we went back up to, there was a pass, it was 18.3 there. So it was definitely slow going. But at one of the monasteries, there was a cave where Milarepa, according to them, had sat and lived in the year 1100. And I had encountered Milarepa earlier in my life in the 70s through a book that had come out at the time, The Songs of Milarepa, and I was so touched by his love songs. He spoke about love, and so it all started to connect that, no matter what strain of, if you're a practitioner in your religion, if you take it to a deeper level, you get to experience that all-encompassing love. And I got to sit in the cave there and feel that energy. And that was a real change in my life. After that, I moved. I really wanted to deepen my practice, and that actually created this move here to Taos.
Are there ever any real concerns for your safety, whether it's from animals or other hikers? And if so, how do you account for those?
Well, my son said when I first went out, no, I had done already. I had done Oregon already. And the next year, I just did a little stretch, and in the third year, he said, how do we know that you're going to be okay? He said, there are these things, they're called GPS devices. You should get one of those and then, connect with us every night. So I have to say, my children never freaked out. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they read my book and they go, God, they don't know all the things I did or where I was, but they gave me the freedom. And I was living in a community of people who were outdoorsy and didn't raise that as a real issue. That's come more later. I think the more people are disconnected from nature, the more they will raise it, how dangerous it is. In general, someone said, aren't you afraid that, as a woman alone, I said, if you have a creepy guy that wants to do something with women, they're not going to hike out into the wilderness to find you. So no worries about that. But animals, you need to know animal behavior. Animals are not here to attack us. Unless they've gone rogue or something has happened to them, you take that risk. But you take a lot more risk getting in your car every day and driving down the freeway. So I usually, every summer, I saw one or two bears at a distance. I had one walk by my tent once, but they're just on their way to find food. And if you do it smart, they won't come into your tent. You don't have your food in your tent, because they can smell it. So you hang it somewhere, you have it in a bear canister. And I don't know if I'm just, because it hasn't happened to me, I've never run into difficulties. And I had never, until 2020, I think, I'd never seen or heard, maybe I'd heard a mountain lion, because sometimes they will jump on their prey, they sit above and watch them. But I finally saw one at 11 o'clock in the morning, but I realized after, it was huge. It was a huge mountain lion, but it was 30 feet ahead of me on the trail, bounding down the trail and then going down into the brush and the trees. And I realized it was because I was out walking a fire at that point. There was a fire that had broken out in Northern California, as they do almost every summer now. And I was hoofing it down to the river, and so was that mountain lion, So he wasn't interested in me as food. They don't come down during the day. They may be hunting, at sunset or early in the morning, but during the day when you're hiking, you don't see the wild animals very much. Bears will roam around during the day, but they're also just looking for food. So,
can you share a bit about your husband and how his loss shaped the decision to embark on the 2,600-mile journey?
Well, I have to say it didn't. I didn't say, oh, I miss him so much, I'm going to go hike this journey. It's when I decided to, find out what the back of Oregon looked like because I had the time, and I wasn't a caretaker anymore at that point. That's when I found that there was a lot of grief. It had been 2 years, and that I wasn't really in touch with. And when you're physically active, just like I said before, when you're in deep meditation, these things will come to the surface. And so it would rise to the surface as I was hiking or when I was standing somewhere and took in the beauty, sometimes with the contrast with how beautiful everything was, and then I would miss him. Or I had some pieces of equipment that were his, and I lost one, and, the finality then would hit me of never this again. So, yes, it did become, it came up for years. So over this 10-year span, it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that nothing about that would come up anymore. So I knew I had walked it off. I was done with that.
What is the Pacific Crest Trail, and where does it start and end?
It's a long-distance trail, and there's 3 of them that in America that run from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. So the Pacific Crest Trail is in the West Coast. The Continental Divide Trail runs here from the bottom of New Mexico to Canada, and I've started hiking little sections of that. And then there's the Appalachian Trail that runs on the East Coast. So some people are called triple crowners, and they do all 3 of them through hiking. And I didn't through hike it. If I had been younger, I could have done that. And maybe I could have done it, but as I say in my introduction, I wasn't proving my physical capacity. I was only grateful that I could do as long as I wanted to go for a certain time. I was traveling in other parts of the world. In the beginning, I was still working, and then I had other things that had my interest. So after 5 weeks, I'd say, it's time to go home. That's enough. I've had my experience out there. So, but some people go for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. And they live there and they kind of reinvent themselves. Younger people often do that. But you don't have to be young to do that. You can be old and do it too.
After being out on some of your longer trips, did you ever find yourself wanting to sleep outside when you got home because it was too quiet indoors?
Actually, it's not too quiet indoors. It's quiet indoors. Outdoors, when you live in a town, it's not quiet. And in the wilderness, it's quiet. Outdoors. Maybe the trees are rustling but it's not like there's all kinds of animal noises or, sometimes you hear an animal noise, but not much. No.
I got the idea from a hiker I knew that hiked part of the Appalachian Trail. He went from Georgia to Virginia, and then he hurt his back and he had to stop. But he told me that when he got home, it was just too quiet in the house. He had to sleep out in a tent in his backyard for a while.
Well, then the Appalachian Trail must be really noisy, which I sort of understand. It's close to all kinds of towns and roadways. It's a very different experience. I mean, when you're in the Sierras, 200 miles in the Sierras, you cannot, there are only a few ways to hike out and then drive to a town. You're miles from any regular road. If you want to get resupplied in the middle of that, near Kings Canyon, you have to send your supplies in a bucket 5 weeks ahead, because they only come out they have these Swiss all-terrain vehicles that they ride through the wilderness to get to the nearest place where they pick up those resupply boxes and then bring them back in. You're not close to any towns. Once in a while, in the desert, you might, hiker town, it's not really a town, but you're near a roadway. There are places where you cross real roads, but most of the time you don't cross any paved roads. That's what's so unique about it, that you're really in the wilderness. Like in Washington, I hiked through, old growth forest for hours. These trees are just immense. And there's a hallowedness, as they say, about it being there, like, oh, people don't come here very often.
Are there a lot of hikers out there on the trails?
There are. Once Wild was published, the amounts just went up. They had to give people permits. It jumped up from a couple of hundred to like 5,000. People all wanted to do it. It doesn't mean they all make it, but they want to try it. And I think the AT is way more busy than the Pacific Crest Trail. Yeah.
The AT, which one is that one?
Appalachian Trail.
Oh, the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
Yeah, this guy had told me that he had to re-equip boxes to different towns, and he had it timed and everything. So
yeah, I had to do that too. Yeah. And then, you had to get off the trail, hitch a ride to wherever that town was. And like I said, it was rare that Warner Springs, they had a post office, and we hiked through there. It's in California. And we could pick it up on the trail, but it happens only a few times. Most of the times you have to hitch or take a bus or something to the nearest town to pick it up and then hitch back in. So there's a lot of logistics involved.
Yeah, definitely. And interesting that you're hitching rides. You're out there thumbing it?
Yep.
That's cool.
I'm from the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, we hitched everywhere, but I wouldn't recommend it here. But there's a whole trail culture when you're around a big trail like that. So there are trail angels. There's people who park their truck by the trail and give you treats and cold drinks. There's people who make it their business of making sure there's water in the desert. They truck in gallons and gallons and gallons of water and make sure that that supply station gets filled while all these groups come through. The towns benefit from people coming there, sleeping, washing, staying overnight or a day or two, eating out. So there's a real sort of friendly interaction. As one of a British hiker that I hiked with for a while said, he said, I didn't know Americans were so friendly. He said, from seeing what I saw on TV and what I had known through the media, I didn't have that impression at all. But here, just all ordinary people, and they love to help, and they open their houses to you if you have a mishap, or if you just need a night somewhere to stay, you don't have much money. And that's definitely, it's a whole different way of experiencing America, which is great.
That is great. Well, what inspired you to write your book, Body and Grace, A Woman's Hike to Wholeness on the Pacific Crest Trail?
If you're a writer and you spend 10 years doing this, at some point you say, I got to write something about it. I want other people to know what that is like and not just have it disappear. I have so many photos. I've made short, slideshows and stuff and share them with friends. But I thought I need to let people know, especially women after 50, which is kind of my audience, that you too can do this. This is doable. I was 65 when I started. I was 75 when I finished. I am still hiking. I'm still backpacking. I hope I got a new knee this last year, so I'm planning on being back there this summer. Women shrink. Older people think, it's too much, can't do it. So my message is that all depends, If it takes work to stay in shape, and big things can happen to a body, but if you train so that you can go out. You spend time just being fit. You're doing your strength training. You're doing all the stuff that's involved in getting ready for a goal like that. And I heard from a woman this week who had never really done it, but she planned to do a 15-mile hike. It is in New Mexico. And she's been training for weeks for it. And she's just so excited. You know, she gave herself a whole new view on life that, oh, wow, I can do this. And I said, well, it's going to be 90 degrees. Apparently the weather is really hot. It's not going to be. So she said, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to do what I can. So, you know, it's not just a physical feat. It's learning to manage yourself, be honest with yourself. You learn about yourself in ways that gives you a whole new take on life. Life isn't over after your kids are gone and your career is over. You know, there's places to explore and places internally to explore, and that will do that.
Where can people go to find out more about your book?
It's, of course, already on Barnes & Nobles and Amazon and all the regular outlets, so people can pre-order. But you can learn more about it by going to my website. It's called transformation-travel.com. And I use that title because the things I do have been transformational. And so you'll see some YouTubes there. And I have a page for women over 50. And there's a store, an online store, where you can read about the book and you can actually order it there. Though people now all prefer to order it through the online outlets. But that's where you can find more about it. And I have some links to podcasts and interviews that I've done. People can hear more about my perspective on all this.
Dami, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
In light of this podcast and this station, I would say, let your world expand. There's more to it than the eye can see, literally. And if you put yourself on the edge of your experience, you know, you give yourself the chance to, be alone maybe on a hike in the wilderness sometime and feel your fear and say, okay, so what? Break through that. Let yourself break through that. And don't push it. Don't do something dangerous. But I always say, as Rumi said, go where you fear to live. And you will find out that there's a lot more to it than just this body walking on the dirt. You know, you may encounter a Bigfoot. You may hear a voice. You may see other beings that travel around. The Native Americans here in, I've traveled around this part of the Southwest, they see and encounter beings from other realms all the time. So if you're open to it, you too can have that experience, and your life will be richer for it.
Dami, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
It was very fun to talk with you, and I'm glad that I can reach some other people. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.